بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم بسم الله اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين وبارك فينا يا رب العالمين كن معنا ووفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى. I'm laughing because when I had to close everything to do what I just did, I lost the book that I that I just found. But don't not to fear. Google is tracing everything, and they've so conveniently let me know exactly what I was looking at most recently, and all is well. Alhamdulillah. All right, so we left off last time on this. There was one section where we were reading about this idea of. Um, Let me show you that real quick before I do this. Um, Here we go. He was talking about the book of Allah that's written or read, and the book of Allah that's seen, namely the Quran and then nature, quote unquote. Um, and this idea of seeing the meaning behind things and an ayah, and what is an ayah, that it connects to something that goes further and deeper. And then he mentioned this section here on, we may now recall, rahimahullah ta'ala wa nafanallahu iyahu bi'ulumihi fi darain, ameen. We may now recall our earlier reference to the relevance obtained between tafsir and tet wheel as valid methods of approach to knowledge and scientific methodology respecting our study and interpretation of the world of nature and its significance in our conception of knowledge and education, in the same way that tafsir and tet wheel apply to the glorious Quran, involving its entire conceptual system, its reflected meanings in the hadith and sunnah, and in the things of the empirical world. So is the book of the world of nature to be interpreted by scientific methods emulating those of tafsir and tet wheel, treating the things of the empirical world as words, as signs and symbols operating in a network of conceptual relations that altogether describe an organic unity reflecting the noble Quran itself. So I had mentioned in that context this idea of tafsir and ta'wil, and how he's drawing upon the methods of interpretation that have been developed by Muslim scholars for dealing with the Quran, and saying that a similar, like mirrored methodologies will have to exist for the natural world as well. So I had mentioned at that point that some sort of proper definition of tafsir and ta'wil in the context of usul al-fiqh, the science whereby we learn how to interpret text, would be useful in understanding that. So that's what I was trying to find so that we can begin with that. Um, I feel like this is in it. It may be in Hisham Kamali's Principles of Islamic Jurisprudence book in English. I know that there's two prints of that. One of them is older and one of them is newer, and the older one is significantly smaller than the newer. I just tried to pull that up online, and it didn't, as far as I could tell really quickly, it didn't really have the section on Arabic language, which kind of makes sense because it's hard to translate anyways. To translate how is the Arabic language applied, what are the different methods that are used in applying the Arabic language in order to get to this kind of stuff is, like maybe that's actually not something that's easy to translate. So, but in any case, we want to at least make mention very briefly of tafsir and ta'wil without going too far. So what can be mentioned is that in usul al-fiqh, the branch of knowledge whereby the Muslims tried to determine, namely, three major things. One of those major things is it relates to the sources of what can be used to derive a ruling in Islam. So, what are the sources that we use? And we mentioned that in the Monday class last week. We began that in the Monday class. The book, the Quran, the Sunnah, the ijma', the scholarly consensus, and qiyas. And those are examples of things that have been considered by the scholars of usul fiqh in this case, foundations of the fiqh are acceptable evidences. So this is one topic that is studied in usul al-fiqh. The second topic that's studied is essentially the indications of the Arabic language. So we know that the Quran and the Sunnah are acceptable sources, and we have to interpret those sources, and we have to weigh them in light of themselves and each other and other considerations, direct and indirect, apparent and less apparent, and come to some sort of conclusion as to which meaning is the most preponderant. And that is all done by certain methods of dealing with the Arabic language itself. It's not just a interpretive free-for-all, even as the Arabic language goes, but there are references to be used and methods to be employed and so on. So this would be the second major category of usul al-fiqh. Then the third major category is who is the one that meets the qualifications of the person who can engage this whole process. So who is the person, hal al-mustafid, who is the person who is qualified to do this? Is it just anyone? Like anyone can say, well, I think Islam says this. And the other person can say, well, I think it says this. And the other person says, well, actually, I think it says this. Or are there actually, or is there some sort of standard for who has attained that level of requisite learning, right? Well, that was the major third area. So the second area about the Arabic language is where you get into these issues like tafsir and tet wheel and so on. So let me share this this passage. This is from a book called Al-Wajiz fi Usul al-Fiqh by Shaykh Zuhaili, rahimahullah ta'ala. I believe he passed away recently, didn't he? Ustad Honest. I think he passed away in the last couple of years. But anyways, so what you're going to have here then is these different meanings. I went to the one on ta'wil, and it has reference to ta'wil and tafsir. So we'll just come back. We'll use this. So always in these books, they're going to give you the linguistic definition. Then they're going to give you the definition in the world of this science. Okay. So with ta'wil, he said قال رحمه الله تعالى نفعنا الله وإياه بعلومه في الدارين والتأويل في اصطلاح الأصوليين هو صرف اللفظ عن معناه الظاهر إلى معنى آخر يحتمله بدليل يصيره أو يسيره راجحا. So this is the definition. The definition is ta'wil is to have a word and that word has an apparent meaning and it has a less apparent meaning. And it is to give precedence to the less apparent meaning rather than the apparent meaning because of some other consideration that makes the less apparent more likely to be correct. Okay, this is ta'wil, essentially. Okay, it's a word that comes up a lot in Islamic studies, not just in this context. It comes up in the Quran, it comes up in a lot of different places. Sometimes it means slightly different things, as we saw last time on Monday with the word of sunnah. Can't really assume that everyone is attending both, so, but we saw this on sunnah. Yeah. So that's a good question, Anthony. Inshallah, we'll come to it in a second. So but the point here is that you have essentially what the point is, and let me go to there's an example down here that he gives a ta'wil with tafsir, contrast between them. تأويل والتفسير سبقت الإشارة لبيان الفرق بين التأويل والتفسير في بحث المفسر وأن التفسير بيان للمعنى المراد من الكلام على سبيل القطع والتأويل بيان للمعنى المراد من الكلام على سبيل الظن. ولهذا يحرم التفسير بالرأي دون التأويل. So essentially, the meaning that is connected to tafsir, it's something that is it's a clarification of a meaning that is pretty sure. It's pretty there's a high level of certainty about it. Um, whereas the ta'wil is to so there's various levels of indication, right? So below that would be a level where it seems clear, but it is possible that it has other meanings. And the ta'wil would be to leave that apparent to the less apparent. This happens in everyday speech, but I don't want to go off too much into it. I think the point of it here is to recognize that when he's saying this, he's trying to employ methodological frameworks that we apply to the Quran and use that to apply to the observed world as well. And that might, so he's saying, like, there might be certain, for example, levels of conclusions in science. Maybe something can be concluded with absolute certainty. Okay, it's like a tafsir. And maybe there's something else that seems pretty certain, but there's another possibility. And that other possibility, maybe it aligns with something that we believe based on the Quran. So then we give precedence to that other possibility rather than the one that seems more apparent because of because of another evidence that gives priority to that. Anyways, it's bringing that world to bear onto another world, which is important because you have to bring methodologies together. There's a question in the chat box concerning the Arabic language when it comes to rendering rulings in fiqh. My understanding is that the meanings of Arabic words are hermeneutically locked within 7th century framework. How then does one do qiyas in the case, say, where a totally new concept unknown to the Arabs emerge? That's a good question. So basically, and it kind of ties into this, interestingly enough, because the thing that's coming up here is this idea of there's a word and then there's the meaning under the word, right? So the qiyas is not on the word itself when we get into the realm of fiqh. The qiyas would be on the illah that's underlying the original ruling. So basically the way it works is that the most simple way is that there's a ruling and it's understood that the reasoning for that ruling is understood. And that's a huge field, whether it's understood by a text, whether it's understood by some sort of derivation, and the obviously varying levels of certainty that we hold on that. So like if the text tells us what the underlying reasoning for the ruling is, that's very clear. But if we look at the ruling and we derive some sort of reasoning for it, then that's an act of ijtihad in itself. It's not known by the text per se. But nonetheless, it is to take a ruling that we know and to know the reasoning behind it, and then to find that reasoning in another case that doesn't particularly have a ruling already established. Okay, so um, and so it's based on the reasoning, not on the wording per se. So it can still apply to new concepts or whatever. Hashish would be a good example, like marijuana would be a good example. All types of modern drugs that um, have some sort of impact on a person's ability to comprehend what's going on around them, and whether or not that can be linked to the issue to the ruling on alcohol would be like, for example, the ruling on alcohol by text is pretty clearly about intoxication, and so it's not about the word per se, it's about the intoxication, and then the intoxication can be applied to modern issues. And this is why actually Imam al-Shatibi, wow, this is bringing back flashbacks now, in his muwafaqat, we used to have this class that we used to attend with Dr. Taha Jabir Alwani, Allah yarhamu, and he was really big on like, um, you guys have to think for yourselves and you have to read things that you're not normally going to read. And so he had this class and he would He would sit in his apartment. SubhanAllah, he was like um, basically not really capable of moving so much at that point. So he would kind of like sit in his chair, and we'd go on Friday, and the Jum'ah Musalla is in his building, but he couldn't go downstairs for Jum'ah. Like that's how immobile he was. So he'd sit and he'd teach, and then we'd go down for Jum'ah, and we'd come back, and he'd usually feed us lunch and stuff like that, like the shuyukh always do. Um, but he used to like make us read these really crazy sections, like section on ijtihad from the Risala of Imam al-Shafi'i, section on ijtihad from the Muwafaqat of Imam al-Shatibi, and like compare how did these people talk about ijtihad and what does that mean for like Muslims in America and stuff. It was nice. If you guys don't know Dr. Taha, he was, Allah yarhamu, a PhD in Usul al-Fiqh from Al-Azhar, and sat on many thesis panels and oversaw a lot of PhD research and stuff like that. And also he lived in America for a long time. He was the head of the North American Fiqh Council for a long time. Um, he really had a lot of love for America and the Muslims in America. So anyways, the point is that Imam al-Shatibi there, he talks about this idea that there's portions of the world of deriving rulings and stuff that are totally dependent on textual analysis. And there are portions that are not. So he'll say like, okay, so maybe a certain group of scholars that are going to derive the particular reasoning behind the ruling, they absolutely have to know the Arabic language, and they have to know the Islamic sciences, all of them, and so on and so forth, and everything else, so that they can correctly come up with that. But the person who understands that reasoning and is trying to apply it to modern scenarios, it could be that they're a specialist in other areas that the textual scholars are not specialists in, and they actually have a better understanding of where that illah will show up in modern issues, which was kind of like, you see, uh, so it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. But this is, so it's not necessarily only tied to the Arabic language, depending on the type of issue. So, bismillah. What we are saying is that knowledge, as referring to meaning, consists of the recognition of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. And we're going to continue. We said that there is a something in knowledge which, if it is not inculcated, will not make its teaching and learning and assimilation in education. We said further that this something is knowledge of the purpose of seeking it. That's something, the purpose is what makes the knowledge knowledge. Now, when knowledge, which is here defined as a recognition of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to recognition of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence, is made the content of education, it still would not suffice to render the education in the sense that we are clarifying, unless that something in knowledge is included in the definition of knowledge. So even still, he's saying there's a step further. For recognition alone and of God does not necessarily imply concomitant action on the part of man to behave in accordance with the suitable requirements of what is recognized. So what he's hinting at here is that also in the Islamic paradigm, knowledge is not knowledge if it's not acted upon. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The ones who are, the people of knowledge are those who have fear of Allah. So if it's not acted upon, they could have oceans and oceans and oceans, and it doesn't count. What's the verse in is it Surah Al-Jumu'ah or Surah Al-Saf? The one يحمل أسفارا مثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا. That the example of the people who have learned all of this knowledge but they don't do anything about it is like a donkey that has a bunch of books on its back. Okay, great. It's carrying the knowledge, but the knowledge isn't really doing anything. Recognition alone is not sufficient. Okay, but recognition alone is not sufficient, but action becomes part of it. True recognition must be followed by acknowledgement, otherwise the recognition is in vain. Acknowledgement, like recognition, pertains to man and consists in man making himself suitable to the requirements of the right or proper places of things or affairs. The requirements of the proper places of things and affairs entail action on the part of man, and this action is denoted by the term amal. From this, it is now clear that the something in knowledge that we must have to realize education is acknowledgement of the proper places of things and of God that is recognized as existing in the order of creation and of being and existence. So now we are in a position to complete our definition of the content of education as. So now he's going to come to, here we go, complete this part, right? Because we had content and we had man and we have, what was it? A method, I think. The three major components. So this now the content of education as recognition and acknowledgement of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. So this now is not purely theoretical knowledge, but it's a practical type of knowledge as well. It's action, it's knowledge that has been actualized, and action is stemming from it. In our definition of knowledge, that is, of what knowledge consists and of the content of education, we notice that the concept of proper place pertains to two domains of application. On the one hand, it refers to the ontological domain, which includes man and the world of empirical things. And on the other, to the theological domain, which includes the religious and ethical aspects of human existence. So this proper place is going to have various applications, two domains of application. Proper place means real and true place, as denoted by the term haqq. For haqq signifies both reality and truth relating to the two domains. Haqq signifies a judgment or hukum, conforming with reality or the real situation. This judgment involves statements or uttered words or propositions, religious beliefs, religions, and schools of thought. The exact opposite of haqq is batil, meaning falsehood, something vain, futile. The term haqq then basically signifies a suitableness to the requirements of wisdom and justice. So it's developing. So the proper place, in order to think about a proper place, we have to have an understanding of haqq. In order to have an understanding of haqq, we have to have an understanding of the requirements of wisdom and justice. So the term haqq then basically signifies a suitableness to the requirements of wisdom and justice. We understand by justice, adl, a harmonious condition of things being in their right or proper places. This is, again, these are definitions that are in the Islamic tradition. By wisdom, hikmah, we mean the knowledge given by God, which the recipient is able to effect, by which the recipient is able to effect correct judgments as to the proper places of things. Thus, when we speak of the truth of a matter as the suitableness of a fact or a reality to a judgment, we mean by that judgment that which is derived from wisdom. Truth or haqq is then a suitableness to the requirements of the proper places of things, recognized by true judgment. The notion of right or proper places involves necessity for things to be in that condition, to be deployed in a certain order, arranged according to various levels and degrees. Ontologically, things are already so arranged. But man, out of ignorance of the just order pervading all creation, makes alterations and confuses the places of things such that injustice occurs. So in the actual reality of being, the order is already there. But sometimes human beings, we mess up that order. When the truth of the matter is revealed to man and recognized by him, it then becomes incumbent upon him to guide his conduct so as to conform with that truth. By his conformity with that truth, he is in effect putting himself in his proper place. So for the human being to recognize the order of creation, and then to be told also on top of it the correct order of creation through revelation, and then to submit himself or herself to that order, is to recognize his or her actual place in the order, which is to receive God, or receive knowledge from God, and to act upon it and to order our perceptions of how we place things in the world according to that guidance. Recognition of the truth in both domains, the ontological and the theological, necessitates in man a conduct that conforms with that truth. Thus, haqq also signifies duty or obligation that binds in accordance with the requirements of reality and truth. So there's then also, there has to be some consequence to this. It's not just the recognition, but the acknowledgement that is necessary. So there's a duty or obligation that comes with an understanding of the proper places of things. This all may seem like very jumbled, but a recognition of the proper places of things is essential to society, to human civilization, to relationships, to everything. Everything gets mixed up when roles are not understood. Everything also gets mixed up when roles are abused, obviously. But there's something that I'm thinking of, but it's kind of personal, so I can't really share it. But there's consequences to not putting things in the right place. And yes, it is. It is. That's a really interesting point, Anthony. So not that I disagree, but this kind of thinking is often used to keep minorities down in their place. Yeah, and that's why there's a reaction to it, right? And I think I kind of hinted at that a little bit last time, that the reactions to these kind of things are not like, I think it was when we were talking about hierarchy and kind of like this reaction to negate the existence of hierarchy and to just equal the plane. But when you equal the plane, you have issues too. And in the end, someone is still making decisions. Someone is still calling the shots. We've been watching Legend of Korra, Avatar Legend of Korra, of course. You know, it's not as clean as Last Airbender. You know, it's not as, you can't watch it with the same relax that we watched the other ones with the smile. But we just the interesting thing about Legend of Korra is the political commentary in each season, right? Like, so like the first season she's going against the like extreme socialist, I guess you can say, or something along those lines. And then the second one she's going against basically the extreme theocracy. And then she goes against the anarchist, and then she goes against the fascist, basically, in those 4 seasons, which is pretty cool. But you see that in the first one when she's dealing with the equalists. The equalists are like, we want everything the same, and then not the same. And but yeah, these things are definitely used to oppress people, and that's the problem. Hopefully, having some sort of reference to truth that goes beyond a particular individual by way of revelation helps in that. But as we all know, revelation also gets abused. But the protection of the message is not in the individuals or not in any particular group. The protection of the message is in the entirety of the body of the Muslims. So hopefully human existence will have these imbalances, and hopefully they can be rectified over time with like the mujaddid and different efforts that occur, inshallah. But absolutely, it's important to acknowledge that. I think it's important to acknowledge that. It's kind of like even with a lot of things around parenting, for example, like, okay, we believe that, or let me go with education. So education, like classical understanding of education, is the student comes, they listen, the teacher teaches, they don't disrupt, They don't do anything else. They don't make problems. They just listen. And oftentimes that's actually too one-sided. It's too like, okay, it's you can engage with the students a little bit. You can talk to them a little bit. You can ask them questions. It can, doesn't mean that they have to be completely silent. But then the flip side response to it is just this like complete free for all. Students are basically learning on their own type thing. Um, so, anyways, alhamdulillah. Duties and obligations. When in Islam we speak of man as possessing rights in the sense of just claim or what he is entitled to, we mean by that his duty or obligation, as described above. Thus, acknowledgement as the fundamental element in true recognition in the Islamic concept of education means affirmation and confirmation, or realization and actualization in oneself of what is recognized. This is denoted by the term tahqiq, which is derived from the same root as haqq. Acknowledgement of what is recognized is what renders education an education. Otherwise, recognition alone is but a learning. Ta'allum. You learned it, but you didn't really do it. And, this one's very real. So education is a process in this understanding that he's putting forth here. And because wisdom is a part of it, it kind of becomes better with time. Subhanallah. It's like, I think I've made this example before about we use jujitsu, but like, for example, they have this program, introductory, basic techniques program, and they'll teach you a program, and they'll say, and these are the same techniques that I use to win my matches in MMA. So does that mean that you can learn that technique and go win matches in MMA? Halal and haram aside of MMA. But does that mean you can just learn that technique and go win a match in MMA? Probably not. You're not going to, unless it's like a fluke accident type thing. But it's the same technique. It is the same technique. But you're not the same. Like you talk to sometimes people again in jiu-jitsu and they'll be like, well, they won this, like they win a big tournament. They win the big tournament using the same technique that you learn as a white belt. They're a black belt. They learned the same technique 10 years ago. They learned it as a white belt. Now they're using that same technique to win a tournament as a black belt. Does that mean you could have gone in and won that tournament? No, you can't. It's different. Same concept, but the actualization of it, the tahqiq of it, is completely different. And so there's stages in that actualization. It's a process that's ongoing. At this stage of our exposition of the concept of education in Islam, we have already brought to bear upon it many of the key concepts that form the basic vocabulary of the Islamic conceptual system. This is what I referred to that is going to come. We have briefly explained the concepts of meaning, ma'na, knowledge, ilm, justice, adl, wisdom, hikmah, action, amal, right or proper in respect of what is true and real, haqq, self, nafs, heart, qalb, mind and intellect, aql, hierarchical order in creation, maratib and darajat, words, signs and symbols, ayat, interpretation, tafsir and tet wheel. We have woven these concepts together in meaningful pattern, elucidating the concept of education peculiar to Islam, which we now define as recognition and acknowledgement progressively instilled into man of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. So here's his definition now for it. From what we had in the very beginning, he reached to this now. Something that I was going to say about that. Oh, I just recalled. Some of you have the physical copy of this paper. My understanding is that that's different than this.
So it has the passage that is included, but there's also an introduction beforehand, a statement of intention.
There's
where he
more.
Yeah, so he clarifies, the author, uh, a statement of intention, preliminary remarks. He talks about the scientific nature of the Arabic language.
Does he talk about Tafsir and Tet Wheel there?
Yeah,
He
it
does,
has
right?
lots of
Okay.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it makes sense. Because when I was reading this, I don't have the physical copy, but
Mhm.
when he, like where we started today, and when I was reading it before, when he says Tafsir and Tet Wheel, um, we may now recall our earlier reference to the relevance obtained between Tafsir and Ta'wil. And I was like,
Yeah.
uh, where is this? Right? Like it's not in this PDF. Faisal was asking, are there many PDFs of this document with variations? This is the only one I've seen, but it seems that the version that's in print has some additions. So, because I had another friend who was watching the video afterwards, and then he reached out to me and he said like, the physical copy that he has actually a little bit more to it. So, alhamdulillah. We're trying to go with things that are digital. That way everyone can access them, inshallah. Could you share the link to the authentic version? The fuller version is not a PDF. It's a print. If I don't know where it can be found, but you may, um, maybe if any of you find it, you can share the link. Uh, but you have to get the print version, the published version. Okay, so recognition and acknowledgement progressively instilled into man of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. There is one other key concept which in reality is central to education and the educational process, because the others we have mentioned all focus their meanings in this context toward it alone, such that by itself it stands sufficient as the precise term to denote education. This is because the key concept alluded to identifies itself as the something, and knowledge which is knowledge of the purpose of seeking it. This major concept is couched in the term adab. Adab. Okay, here we go. Adab is the discipline of body, mind, and soul, the discipline that assures the recognition and acknowledgement of one's proper place in relation to one's physical, intellectual, and spiritual capacities and potentials. The recognition and acknowledgement of the reality that knowledge and being are ordered hierarchically according to their various levels and degrees. Since adab refers to recognition and acknowledgement of the right and proper place, station, and condition in life, and to self discipline in positive and willing participation in enacting one's role in accordance with that recognition and acknowledgement, its actualization in one and in society as a whole reflects the condition of justice, adab. Justice itself is a reflection of wisdom, hikmah, which we have already defined as that God given knowledge which enables the recipient to discover the right and proper place for a thing or a being to be. So, edeb encompasses all of these things. The condition of being in the proper place is what we have called justice. And edeb is the method of knowing by which we actualize the condition of being in the proper place. It's the method of knowing. There's actually a way of being. That's why actually I think he might say it in here, but this idea that Islam is a way of life. Islam is a way of life, yes, but Islam is even further than that. Islam is a way of being. It's a way of being. Like how should we be in the world? What is how relating to all of these concepts. So adab, in the sense I am defining here, is also a reflection of wisdom. And with respect to society, adab is the just order within it. Adab, concisely defined, is the spectacle, mashhad, of justice as it is reflected by wisdom. The spectacle of justice as it is reflected by wisdom. We said that adab identifies itself as knowledge of the purpose of seeking knowledge. The purpose of seeking knowledge in Islam is to inculcate goodness in man and individual self. The end of education in Islam is to produce a good man, and not, as in the case of Western civilization, to produce a good citizen. By good in the concept of good man is meant precisely the man of adab in the sense here explained, as encompassing the spiritual and material life of man. For man, before he became manifested as man, has sealed an individual covenant, mithaq, collectively with God, and has recognized and acknowledged God as Lord, when he witnessed unto his self and affirmed, Yea, Bela, to God's am I not your Lord, alastu bi rabbikum. This is the primordial covenant. This means that before he assumed physical form, man has been equipped with the faculty of spiritual cognition. Before the physical form, there was still ma'rifah, and was able to recognize and acknowledge by the fact of what he said in affirmation, qawl, through his intellectual power, speech, nutq, the reality and truth of his existential condition in relation to his Lord, that is, his possessor, creator, sustainer, cherisher, provider. Indeed, this covenant and what it implies is the very essence of religion, ad-deen, as enacted in Islam. For all the principles of Islam ultimately revert to that spiritual pre-existing condition. Everything is taking us back to that primordial covenant. So the men of spiritual discernment have referred to man in that spiritual condition as an-nafs an-natiqah, the rational soul. The other aspect of man's nature is what refers to his manifestation in physical form, an-nafs al-hayawaniyah, the animal soul. Man then is a double associate, a single being possessing a dual nature with two souls, nafsan, analogous to it, the one higher in relation to the other. It is the recognition and acknowledgement by the lower animal self of its proper place in relation to the higher rational self that constitutes for that lower self its adab. For the lower nafs has an adab to submit itself to the higher one. Can you perhaps, it's not that your question isn't clear, Anthony, it's that my cognition isn't clear. So perhaps if you could answer or ask that another way, or say more about it, or you could just say what you think, because uh, it's probably going to be correct. MashaAllah alaik. So there's recognition means discovering the proper place in relation to what is recognized. And acknowledgement means concomitant action resulting from discovering the proper place in relation to what is recognized. Recognition alone without acknowledgement is mere arrogance. For it is the haqq of recognition to be acknowledged. So to just recognize it and not do anything about it is arrogance. There has to be action. Acknowledgement alone without recognition is mere ignorance. So if you're acting upon something and making it part of how you do things and whatever, and there's not actual understanding that it's based off of. For it is the haqq of acknowledgement to actualize recognition. Right. That's part of the act of acknowledgement is that it actualizes the recognition. Like we said, that knowledge of the thing gets deeper and deeper through its acknowledgement. Either one by is, for in Islam there is no worthwhile knowledge without action accompanying it, nor worthwhile action without knowledge guiding it. So this is like reminiscent of the statement of Imam al-Ghazali, right? That knowledge without action is vanity, and action without knowledge is insanity. Knowledge without action is vanity, and action without knowledge is insanity. It's very similar to what he's saying here. The just man is he who affects such adab unto his self, resulting in his being a good man. The concept of adab, as I have formulated it here, is construed from its meaning as understood in the early Islamic sense before its restriction to the context revolving around the concept of cultural refinement pertaining to letters and social etiquette, which was affected to a considerable extent by the innovations of the literary geniuses. So adab comes to refer to basically a literature, man of letters and literature type thing. And he's saying this is the adab, the understanding of adab that I'm positing here is predates that. In its original basic sense, adab is the inviting to a banquet. The idea of a banquet implies that the host is a man of honor and prestige, and that many people are present. That the people who are present are those who, in the host's estimation, are deserving of the honor of the invitation. And they are therefore people of refined qualities and upbringing who are expected to behave as befits their station in speech, conduct, and etiquette. The Islamization of this basic concept of adab as an invitation to a banquet, together with all the conceptual implications inherent in it, which even then already involve knowledge, is significantly and profoundly expressed in a hadith narrated by Ibn Mas'ud, where the noble Quran itself is described as God's invitation to a banquet on earth, in which we are exhorted to partake of it by means of acquiring real knowledge of it. إن هذا القرآن مأدبة الله في الأرض فتعلموا من مأدبته. Subhana. That there's some mistakes in the Arabic there. معلش. إن هذا القرآن, this Quran is the invitation of Allah in the earth. So learn from its banquet, essentially. Learn from its banquet. The discerning Quran is God's invitation to a spiritual banquet. And the acquiring of real knowledge of it is the partaking of the fine food in it. In the same sense that the enjoyment of fine food in a banquet is greatly enhanced by noble and gracious company, and that the food be partaken of in accordance with the rules of refined conduct, behavior, and etiquette, so is knowledge to be extolled and enjoyed and approached by means of conduct as befits its lofty nature. That's kind of a cool point. Thus, the men of discernment speak of that knowledge as the food and life of the soul. So this is qut and qulub. One of the early works in spirituality. Who is it? Abu Talib al-Makki, I believe. Qut and qulub. The book is called The Sustenance of the Soul, of the Hearts. The food of the hearts. Food of the hearts. And it's about religious knowledge and learning. Right? This is a food we're partaking in. Similarly, it's said about like Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, that he used to go and make dhikr every single morning after he prays Fajr until after the sun rises. And he used to say about that this is like the food for my soul. Without it, I don't have my sustenance for the day. Like if I don't do this, I don't have what I need my soul doesn't have what it needs to get through the day. Forget my breakfast. This is my spiritual breakfast. Right? This is my spiritual breakfast. And there's actually narrations that say that the thing that he used to repeat in that time is the Fatiha. Let's read Surah Al-Fatiha. Surah Al-Fatiha is very powerful. But this is the food of the soul. The Tet Wheel, interpreting the meaning of the living, Al-Hayy, as the knowing, Al-Alim. In the passage, he brings forth the living from the dead. Indeed refers to this knowledge as the food and life of the soul. So basically, the living are those who know, and the dead are those who don't know. Right? The example of the heart without the remembrance of Allah is the example of the fish out of the water. That its sustenance has been taken away. Ultimately, real knowledge of it is the tasting of its flavor, the spiritual savoring, though, that men of discernment speak of, which almost simultaneously unveils the reality and truth of the matter to the spiritual vision, kashf. In virtue of this, adab involves action to discipline the mind and soul. It is acquisition of the good qualities and attributes of mind and soul. It is to perform the correct as against the erroneous action, of right or proper as against wrong. It is the preserving from disgrace. Thus, adab as the disciplinary action, the selective acquisition, the correct performance, and the qualitative preservation, together with the knowledge that they involve, constitutes the actualization of the purpose of knowledge. So this is like adab is the issue. When we say that the purpose of knowledge is to produce a good man, we do not mean that to produce a good society is not its purpose. For since society is composed of people, making every one or most of them good produces a good society. Education is the fabric of society. The emphasis on adab, which includes amal in education and the educational process, is to ensure that ilm is being put to good use in society. For this reason, the sages, men of discernment, and the learned scholars among the Muslims of earlier times combined ilm with amal and adab and conceived their harmonious combination as education. This is huge right here. For this, right here. For this reason, the sages, men of discernment, and the learned scholar among the Muslims of earlier times combined ilm with amal and adab and conceived their harmonious combination as education. This is what education is, all of these. Education is in fact ta'deeb, for adab is here defined already, involves both ilm and amal. So this is already part of the package. Um, this is also why learning is always an issue that demands suhbah. And it's a major, I don't think he mentions it here, but suhbah is a major issue here. Maybe it didn't occur to him in the same way because technology wasn't the same, well, probably when he was writing this, right? But for us now, it becomes even more real because so much learning is happening without any suhbah and learning. So, suhbah meaning company. So, some sort of relationship of mentorship that helps the person to understand where to put everything, you know. This gives whole different, like, there's narrations, for example, of one of the students of Malik who says that he spent something like 20 years with Malik. And he says, I learned his knowledge in 1 year, and I learned his adab in the other 19, and I wish I had spent all of the 20 years learning his adab. But now think about like what that means. So like just the raw knowledge wasn't sufficient. The raw knowledge isn't it. The knowledge, they need, what you need to have on top of that is, how do I put this in its right place? Otherwise, you end up being like either a liberal or an extremist, essentially. You end up being a liberal or an extremist because one will take the knowledge and the techniques and the tools and they go all the way the wrong way, and the other one will take the same knowledge and techniques and tools and take them all the way the other way. And that's why the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says that in يحمل هذا العلم في كل what is it, something عدول, that the people, like in every generation there will be people who carry this knowledge, and their role will be to respond to the doubts of the people who cause doubts and to repel the false interpretations of the people who go one way and to pull back the extremism of the people that go the other way. Essentially, this is a paraphrasing of the hadith. You can look, I wrote an article about it on the virtual mosque many years ago. You can try to find it. If maybe put like hadith Jamaal Diwan virtual mosque, you can probably find it. It's not the, I'm not giving you the exact wording right now, but this is essentially what it's going to do. That mentorship is what helps us with that. And to me, this is actually, I think, one of the really big problems that we have now is that an entire generation of people have convinced themselves that their contribution to Islam in America and their community outside of their career and everything else is basically to do stuff online. And then what happens is the in your community who's 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, who needs just like, they don't need a scholar to talk to all the time. They need like big brothers and uncles and aunties and like people who just like hang out with them, spend time with them, did the youth group with them. And over the course of 4 or 5 years, all the things that they were going through from like 11 to 18, they helped them to navigate all those things, right? But we don't have time for that anymore because we're just all online. And it's a lot easier to be online than it is to deal with kids. You know, to convince myself that I'm like making this really amazing contribution. Oh, but like, what are all these people, these human beings that there used to be just like basic ways for them to engage with other people and learn and live and have role models and that's part of that, and they learn the edeb from that. You can't learn edeb from, like, it's really hard to learn edeb from books. You have to learn edeb from the people of edeb, And that's why, that's the quote that I've quoted many times of Imam al-Junaid, who said, علمنا هذا مقيد بالكتاب والسنة فمن لم يجالس الفقهاء ويسمع الحديث ويأخذ أدبه من المتأدبين أفسد من اتبعه. That this knowledge of ours, and Junaid is the one who's the knowledge of like the spiritual realities of Islam. He's the imam of that field. He says this knowledge is confined by the Quran and the Sunnah. So whoever hasn't sat with the people of fiqh and listened to hadith and taken their adab from the people of adab, they will corrupt those who follow them. They will corrupt those who follow them because their chain is broken, teaching them all these little things. And the companions, they had iftikhar over this. They had like honor over this. That Salman, when they came to Salman and they joked with him, and they were making fun of him, and they told him, "Oh, your prophet, he teaches you everything. He even teaches you how to use the restroom." And Salman was mu'taz. He said, "Yeah, he does. He teaches us not to face the qibla and not to clean ourselves with our right hand and to clean ourselves 3 times when we clean ourselves." That's an issue of like, where do you learn that? You learn that through people, through dealing with people and being with the Prophet ﷺ. You learn these things. In the hadith cited above, and to rein in my tangent because we don't want to blow this session. It's 8:10. Okay. In the hadith cited above, the conceptual connection between ilm and adab is already established. In yet another, more well-known hadith, not only is the conceptual connection between the two concepts established in an even more direct way, but it is expressed in such a manner as to imply identity between adab and ilm. The hadith I refer to is the one in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "My Lord educated me and so made my education most excellent. أَدَّبَنِي رَبِّي فَأَحْسَنَ تَأْدِيبِي." The word I have translated as educated is addaba, which according to Ibn Manzur is synonymous with allama, and which Az-Zajjaj attributed to God's manner of educating his prophet. The infinite noun of addaba ta'dib, which I translated as education, signifies the same, and we have its conceptual counterpart in the term ta'lim. In our definition of meaning, we said that meaning is the recognition of the place of anything in a system. Since knowledge consists of the arrival in both senses, so now is concluding all of it based on that hadith, of husul and wusul of meaning in and by the soul, we define knowledge as the recognition of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. In order to render knowledge and education, we included the fundamental element of acknowledgement in the recognition, and we define this content of education as the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. Then we defined education, including the educational process, as the recognition and acknowledgement progressively instilled into man of the proper places of things in the order of creation, such that it leads to the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper place of God in the order of being and existence. We're almost there. Hang tight. Hang tight. You're almost there. Since meaning, knowledge, and education pertain to man alone, and by extension to society, the recognition and acknowledgement of the proper places of things in the order of creation must primarily apply to man's own recognition and acknowledgement of his proper place, that is, his station and condition in life in relation to himself, his family, his people, his community, his society, and to his self-discipline in actualizing within his self-discipline the proper places of things in the order of creation. This means that he must know his place in the human order, which must be understood as arranged hierarchically and legitimately into various degrees, darajat, of excellence based on the Quranic criteria of intelligence, knowledge, and virtue, ihsan, and must act concomitantly with the knowledge in a positive, commendable, and praiseworthy manner. This self-recognition actualized in self-acknowledgement is the adab here defined. When we say that acknowledgement is the fundamental element in true recognition, and that acknowledgement of what is recognized is what renders education an education, we are referring primarily to proper places in the human order and in the order of knowledge and being. Adab is knowledge that preserves man from errors of judgment. Adab is recognition and acknowledgement of the reality that knowledge and being are ordered hierarchically according to their various grades and degrees of rank, and of one's proper place in relation to that reality and to one's physical, intellectual, and spiritual capacities and potentials. In the light of the foregoing definitions and explanations, the words of the Prophet when he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, "My Lord educated me and so made my education most excellent," may be paraphrased in the following way. My Lord made me to recognize and acknowledge, by what He progressively instilled into me, the proper places of things and the order of creation, such that it led to my recognition and acknowledgement of His proper place in the order of being and existence, and by virtue of this, He made my education most excellent. That's the ending. To tie all of everything that came before it into the translation of the meaning of Adabani Rabbi fa ahsana ta'dibi. That this is my Lord gave me this adab and he was the best in doing so. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد. Alhamdulillah, we came to the end. Now open the floor to 10,486 questions and 10,485 I don't knows. Maybe I'll get one. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and your reflections and your questions and your conclusions and anything. All of it's not just almost like imagine we're sitting in a circle now and we're talking to each other. So Bismillah. But I'll leave the myself highlighted just so you guys don't show up on YouTube. Otherwise, I'd make the screen so that you can make your screen so that you can see everyone in the halaqah. So Bismillah. What do you guys have? In the chat box or in person, whichever you prefer.
Shaykh, it's really interesting how the concept of education in Islam, there hasn't been much of anything about when we think of the translation of it into Arabic, tarbiyah, as of yet, right? I mean, I think it's gonna come up later on, but like just I guess into the usage of adab itself, into replacing education or one way or another. Just some thoughts on that.
You're saying it's interesting that like in all of this, the word tarbiyah didn't
pop up yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about that? Why would he do that? Why is he talking about this whole thing and the word tarbiyah doesn't come up? Are you saying something?
No, I don't have anything. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. I wonder, like I feel like at some levels, I wonder if tarbiyah is more of like in modern Arabic usage, tarbiyah is usually the word that's used for education, right? But I don't know that it was classically. Should be an interesting question. I mean, I think the tarbiyah was more often used in the context of like spiritual education in particular. Like someone in their knowledge of God, in a more broad kind of like education. I wonder if that's tied to it somehow, but I don't know.
I was gonna say it seems like here there's not really a clear separation between what you might call like spiritual education and then I guess what we might consider, I don't know, like education, I don't know, like a science education, for example. Because if everything is, ayatullah, then they're all sort of connected, which is kind of how I understand like Tawheed in like a broader sense of like the unification of, I guess, not like, I don't know if everything is the right word, but that's the word that comes to mind. So you don't have like this kind of atomization of knowledge like we kind of do now. So it almost seems like, yeah, like to learn to learn about the physical world would be therefore to like, which should entail sort of, I don't know, spiritual sort of growth. Like, I don't know, which is kind of the sense I've always gotten when I've read works on like, I guess like stuff like this from the Muslim perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. There is a theory of everything. There is a theory of everything. It's Tawheed. It's not what they mean in physics, obviously, but uh, yeah, I feel like I can say, for example, when I was early in my Islam, and very much like a borderline extremist is probably not the right word, but I was just kind of extreme. Um, that's when I quit like all of my science studies, and I just wanted to study Islam basically because like that's what a Muslim does type thing, and which is totally ridiculous. And at some point, you start to realize more about Tawheed and what it means to believe that Allah is the creator and all of this kind of stuff. And you're like, oh man, I wish I hadn't dropped that chemistry class, like that would have been amazing. But I think ideally, yes, all of these things, there's not a separation. Um, there's definitely not a separation ideally.
Yeah, I guess like related to that, because I guess it's not, I guess it relates to kind of what we talked about last week, because it's not so much the study of the thing itself, but the kind of underlying presumptions that are sort of behind the physical sciences in the academy, right? So like you can't really talk about, I guess it's called primary causation. Like it's only secondary causation, right? You can't really talk about teleology, like the purpose of things, where they fit in the system, because all of that got thrown out in the Enlightenment pretty much. So I guess the question I have, as
Right.
as I was reading this, is like how do you, and I don't know that anyone has to have the answer because I sure don't, but like how do you interact or be, I guess, in as a Muslim, if this is our sort of pedagogy, like in a post-enlightenment West, where you don't talk about teleology, you don't talk about meaning. It's kind of funny, like when I started learning about the Dajjal and how he's got one eye. It's like when we was talking about the I guess the nafsan, like the two perspectives,
Mhm.
I guess the was it the empirical and the, I forget what it was, but I always interpreted that to be like maybe not literally, but like there's only one mode of vision, right? So how do we as like Muslims who have this idea of the meaning behind this sort of physical manifestation, like how do we interact with like a post enlightenment world with those things? You don't really consider those things, like you can't. That's just, I mean, not that you can, but that's just like the dominant way that like you encounter in like the academy and stuff, right? Because if you were to run this by like a philosophy professor, like he'd probably laugh in your face, or she would probably like laugh in your face, because
Right.
it's not considered anymore, right? No
Right.
one's talking about, I mean, like this is like Aquinas's like great chain of being, like nobody's talking about that anymore, right?
Right.
As a matter of fact, the Enlightenment was like a reaction to that.
Right.
So
Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys have? Some of you are in that realm. Some of you are in these places. I mean, how do you make sense of all these things? Oh, Yusuf, good to see your name, man. I've been thinking about you. How do you think about these things? I have the luxury of sitting in my religious space. you know, I usually have to argue with people about these things. But what do you do? Anyone have any thoughts? Or Dr. Anthony, you yourself? I mean, what do you do?
I mean,
I keep forgetting to call you doctor.
you don't have to. You're like my bro, Shaykh. It's cool.
Yeah, but you're still a good doctor.
I mean, like I don't really know what to do, but I've seen it a lot in some undergrads where like they, you know, because of certain presuppositions that are in like the academy, they'll come to me. They have come to me in the past with like, hey, it's Ish,
Yeah. He's here.
what's up,
Is that,
bro?
you remember him?
I remember.
Yeah.
It's okay, but like, you know, uh, I don't really know. I don't really know what to do. I feel like it's a really big problem. Um,
Yeah.
because like, you know, you got, I guess it's kind of the paradox of, at least on some level, being a Muslim in America, because you obviously want to get a decent education, but the institutions that are doing the educating are also inculcating like, you know, these one-eyed whatever I, you know, presuppositions. And
Yeah.
so yeah,
Jalik. The Jalik approach.
essentially, yeah.
I mean,
The
just
only thing I can think
recognizing
of
that I
is
think is
like,
important because a lot of our people don't recognize that.
yeah. The only thing I can think of is like, just like you need like religious literacy, like it's a big problem. I feel like there's a certain degree of like philosophical literacy that, I mean, maybe it's like a fard kifaya to produce individuals that know, like, can actually articulate these issues, right? So
Mhm.
that when, you know, so that someone can call BS on this stuff, or at least from our perspective, right?
Right.
Like, that's like one of the only things I've been able to like think of, because like, you know, this stuff is kind of dense. It's not really for everybody.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also realize it's not something that's really valued in our community either. At least of like the philosophical approaches, it's usually seen viewed with like some suspicion, which is kind of
Yeah.
understandable. But
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's kind of like that's one of the casualties of, I would say, like the war on kalam. So one of the casualties of the war on kalam. So with the, you know, not to like make this a groupist issue, but certain, let's just say, theological or trends in the Muslim community kind of wanted us to believe that ilm and kalam was some sort of innovation, even though it's been the practice of the Muslims since the time of the Salaf. Um, and so if you delete ilm and kalam, this approach to Islamic philosophy and metaphysics and stuff, then you eliminate that type of intellectual inquiry, right? And it's fine if that's not your thing. Like, to be quite honest, for me, it's not really my thing. In the same way, for sure, that it's like Sheikh Fuad's thing. Like, this is Sheikh Fuad's thing. You know, like you sit with him, you are going to talk kalam, and it's wonderful. Like I probably wouldn't know anything in kalam if it wasn't for him. and, but you know, like certain people, maybe it's not their thing. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we didn't do it or it's not important or anything else. Like, by all means, people need to do it and it needs to be done. And we need to engage ideas and we need to engage them at a really heavy level. And if it's not, you know, if I feel like by nature I'm just like better equipped for pulling earthworms out of the soil and looking at them and thinking they're beautiful, like everyone can do their own thing, you know, but we still have it. We still have it and we still need to engage it and we still need to do it and take it seriously and not pretend like it's nothing. And for people who are going into like academic routes, a lot of these knowledges, like you said, are fard kifaya, but they can become fard ain. They can be communal obligations that become individual obligations on particular people. So, and maybe that's another thing that's not really understood in our community is like, if you're going to go down certain routes of study, if you're going to go to a university, period, if you're going to exist, like in America at this point, there's a certain level of theological study that you need. And if you're going to go into higher levels, then you need higher levels. Um, uh, the people to provide them, the institutions to support those kind of people, all of those things also then become fard kifaya because these kind of things can't be done without some serious support, you know. people have to be able to think and write and engage these things. But you know, Allah help us. Aisha is there, Nasser is there, Uncle Charlie is there. Uh, I don't think I officially met your husband yet, Aisha. Otherwise, I'd refer to him by name. Welcome.
Yeah, he's a philosophy grad student, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Word, drop some knowledge, man. Help a brother out, man. I've been thinking about this stuff for years, man. Help me out.
I was just gonna say, Dr. Anthony, what you mentioned about, philosophers just laughing at you if you come with, Aquinas's metaphysics to them. I wouldn't generalize like that. There's definitely a lot of analytic philosophers do reject that sort of metaphysics, but that's not everyone. So you definitely have a lot of, Thomistic philosophers today in the academy. You have a lot of Aristotelian philosophers, neo-Aristotelian philosophers in the academy. You have a lot of Christian philosophers as well, lots of Christian philosophers and lots of publications that can support the type of metaphysics that you'll see in Kalam works, for sure. And I think we should benefit from these works because they are much more familiar with philosophy in the academy, contemporary analytic philosophy, than a lot of Muslim scholars are, and a lot of mutakallimun in the Arab world are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've benefited a lot from Christian, particularly Catholic philosophers. They're usually pretty good at, I guess, I think because they themselves come from along this idea of tradition, like they tend to be a little bit more, I don't know, digestible to me as a Muslim. I think I was more thinking like in terms of like, not necessarily philosophy of science, but definitely like within the realm of science, like this stuff is just kind of like people will just like laugh at it, right? Because that is the like dominant like epistemological like paradigm, and so it's like if you come with anything that's not like quote unquote falsifiable or whatever, like it's just does not compute with a lot of them, which I mean I honestly have an issue with because I feel like it's part of the problem, but yeah, this is like an intellectual hobby of mine. It's not, I'm not like a boss or whatever, but yeah, appreciate that. Do you have any like recommendations in terms of like what to read or who to read?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could talk like offline as well. But speaking of Catholics, I'm actually at BC, so I do agree with you.
Okay.
I'm at a Catholic school.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Well, we're really happy to have you all, and there's so much that we can benefit from one another. Our dream with the Majlis was always that like our community has so many amazing people that our goal is to just like put certain foundations, and then after that, everyone else can figure it out, and I just serve the tea, and enjoy ourselves. But really, like, mashallah, I think that's the key for us, that we have so much. Actually, we have so much in our intellectual tradition and our spiritual tradition, in our people, the people that we have in our community. And if we can just build spaces where we can engage with one another on these things and other things, inshallah, Allah give tawfiq. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share before we close up? I have no idea what we're going to read next week. So if you're going to answer that, or if you're going to ask that, I have no idea yet. I didn't think that far in advance.
You wouldn't consider Islam and secularism by
Al-Attas?
No.
Yeah, it's just so big.
It is. I know. Yeah.
I kind of like wanted to choose things that we can get through without 20 sessions, but at the same time, that's a really good book. So do you think we should? getting two nods on that screen. There's two nods.
Oh, no. I've read it several times, and I really want to study it with a teacher because he says so many things that completely change the way I think about almost everything, like of how even my education at UCLA. So I would like to read it with a teacher, and I have a lot of respect for you. So
yeah, I'm afraid it might be above my pay grade, so to speak. Although that terminology is probably not really appropriate for this context, but I could see that being really good with Sheikh Fuad. I just feel like, quite frankly, in the world of kalam and philosophy, I'm very weak because I like the things, but I don't like them enough to be like as strong as. So if it's like a really simple thing, it's fine. But if you start like some of the stuff that I've read in there, I felt like, okay, I don't really get this. And if I don't really get it, then I'm not going to be able to help anyone else get it. We could read it together. It'd be nice. Maybe you guys could figure it out for me. But
I have another suggestion. I'm sorry, I feel like I came in and all these people, but also another book that I've been really wanting to read with a teacher is the Book of Illumination by Ibn Ata'illah. I haven't found anyone who teaches that book. I'm just putting it out there.
Oh, Tanweer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I know Hassan Anwan was referencing that one a lot at some point. I don't know if he was teaching it or not, but yeah, it's a possibility. But that's like a Monday class. That's and we had to take a break from Ibn Ata'illah because we just finished the Hikam. But maybe down the road, that'd be a good one. Tanweer would be a good one. Be good for me too. All right, remind me in the future, inshallah.
I want to third the Islam and secularism. I think I read it shortly after I converted to Islam because I was looking for more philosophical stuff because I guess I'm of that bent. And I remember, I think I was too young into Islam to know exactly what he was describing because my experience with Islam was just not, it was just too soon. So I probably might garner more from it now than I did when I read it initially.
Okay. There is someone who teaches it that probably, let me see if I can find it. Yeah. So let me send you this link for those of you who are really interested in it, in case we don't decide to do it. He sent, and we've had him before, right? Like Dr. Hisham Hillier. Dr. Hisham teaches Islam and secularism of Al-Attas. I think it's a weekly class. And he told me actually when he saw the announcement for this one, he sent a message and he said, like, I'm so excited about this. And in the course of the conversation, found out that he's basically been teaching Al-Attas for like years and been studying him for years and has a personal relationship with him. I think it's here. You can look on Facebook. I think there's like a cool picture from last year where I think I found it. Anyways, there's like a picture on his Facebook thing from last year of him visiting. Yeah, it's pinned. There it is. Here, put it in the box for those who are interested. So he teaches it, and I'm sure it's really profound. But we'll consider it. I'll consider it, inshallah. Make dua. Alrighty, it's getting really late. Ismail's asking me when I'm going to finish because his tooth is about to fall out, and he thinks it might fall out tonight. And it's like really pressing, apparently. So it's not the first one, but it's the first one in COVID, I guess. But barakallahu fikum. Always good to see you all. Always good to spend time with you all. And inshallah, may Allah accept from us. May Allah illuminate our paths and guide us to that which is true and right and make us content and happy with it. And may He make us strong intellectually and spiritually and physically, such that we can face whatever it is that we're going to face in this dunya, and we can meet Him and He's pleased with us. Inshallah, Ameen. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ونعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات تواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا. See you next week. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you to everyone who comes on with their video. It really makes the class different, just so you know. And those of you who didn't, I'm not judging you either. Everyone has their own situation. But when people come with video, it does make it feels more like together. Yeah. All right. Assalamu alaikum.